I was the only one wearing a coat I had bought 5 years ago. Around me, the cemetery was filled with black cashmere, Italian leather shoes, and sunglasses that cost more than my monthly rent. They stood in little clusters, whispering about stocks and summer homes, while I stood alone by the open grave, feeling the rain soak through my thin sleeves. My name is Elena, and the man being lowered into the ground was my father, Robert Sterling. To the world, he was a business tycoon. To my brother Julian, he was a bank account. But to me, he was just Dad, the man whose hand I had held for 3 years while cancer ate him alive. Julian arrived 20 minutes late to the funeral. He stepped out of a rented limousine, looking like he had just walked off a runway. He didn't look at the grave. He didn't look at me. He walked straight to our mother, Patricia, and hugged her. I watched them from a distance, the golden sun and the grieving widow. It was a perfect picture. You would never guess that Julian hadn't visited Dad in 2 years. You would never guess that Patricia had spent the last 6 months of Dad's life asking the doctors how long it would take because she wanted to book a cruise. I walked over to place a single white rose on the casket. As I bent down, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Julian. "Make it quick, Elena," his voice smooth and cold. "The lawyer is meeting us at the house in an hour. We need to get the paperwork sorted. I have a flight to catch tonight." "He just died, Julian," my voice trembling. "Can't you wait a single day?" "Some of us have lives, Elena," he sneered, brushing a speck of dust off his suit. He walked away, leaving me there with the rain and the silence. I knew then that the battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The library in the Sterling estate was exactly as Dad had left it, smelling of old paper and peppermint tea. But the atmosphere was suffocating. Patricia was sitting in Dad's chair, sipping champagne. Julian was pacing by the window, checking his watch every 30 seconds. Mr. Henderson, the family attorney, sat behind the desk, looking uncomfortable. "Let's get this over with," Patricia said, waving her hand. "We all know the arrangement. Robert and I discussed it. The estate goes to me, the business goes to Julian, and Elena gets whatever small allowance is appropriate for her situation." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the document in front of him. "Actually, Mrs. Sterling, the will is quite specific, and it was updated 3 weeks ago." The room went deadly silent. Julian stopped pacing. Patricia put down her glass. "Updated?" Julian asked, his eyes narrowing. Dad was in morphine. He wasn't in his right mind. Who let him update it? "I deemed him to be of sound mind and body," Mr. Henderson said firmly. He was very clear. He began to read. "To my wife, Patricia, I leave the marital home and the joint checking accounts, totaling $2 million. Patricia let out a sigh of relief, though I could see she wanted more. "To my son, Julian," Henderson continued, "I leave the majority shares of Sterling Industries, provided he assumes the role of CEO immediately." Julian smirked at me. "See, nothing changed. However," Henderson raised his voice, "to my daughter, Elena, who was my hands when I could not move and my eyes when I could not see, I leave the contents of Safe Deposit Box 404 at the City Bank and the old hunting cabin in the mountains." Julian laughed, a loud, cruel laugh that echoed off the mahogany walls. "A box and a shack, that's it? After you wiped his drool for 3 years? Oh, Elena, that is priceless." "There is one more thing," Henderson said, looking directly at Julian. "The will stipulates that Elena must move out of the estate within 24 hours. The house belongs to Patricia now, and she has expressed a desire to downsize the occupants." "You can't be serious," I whispered, looking at my mother. "Mom, you're kicking me out? Tonight?" Patricia didn't look at me. She examined her manicured nails. "You're 28, Elena. It's time you stood on your 2 feet. Julian needs your room for a home office. Besides, you have that cabin." I looked at them, the golden sun and the cold mother. They had taken everything, the house I grew up in, the money Dad had built, and now my dignity. "Fine," I said, standing up. I didn't cry. I had cried enough by Dad's bedside. "I'll leave, but remember this, Julian. Dad wasn't stupid. He saw everything." "Dad was a soft old man who didn't know how to do business," Julian scoffed. "Get out, Elena, and don't ask us for money when that box turns out to be empty." I drove 6 hours north, my car packed with the few belongings I could carry. The hunting cabin was exactly what I expected. It was a small wooden structure deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. It hadn't been used in a decade. There was dust everywhere. The fireplace was cold, and the wind howled through the cracks in the walls. I sat on the dusty floor, wrapped in a blanket, and stared at the rusted key Mr. Henderson had given me. Safe Deposit Box 404. It felt like a cruel joke. Dad knew I had no savings. He knew I'd quit my job to care for him. Why would he leave me penniless with a brother who hated me? For 2 days, I lived in that cabin like a ghost. I had no internet, spotty phone service, and barely enough food. I felt abandoned. I felt like the 3 years of sacrifice meant nothing. On the third morning, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from a news app. Sterling Industries shares plummet as new CEO announces sell-off. Julian wasn't running the company. He was selling it apart, piece by piece, to fund his lavish lifestyle. I felt a sick feeling in my stomach. Dad's legacy was being destroyed in less than a week. I looked at the key again. I had to know. I had to know if Dad had truly left me with nothing, or if this was the last puzzle he wanted me to solve. I got in my car and drove back to the city. The bank was sterile and cold. The clerk led me into the vault, the heavy steel door closing behind us with a thud that felt like a prison sentence. She pointed to box 404. My hands were shaking as I inserted the key. I expected to find old photos, maybe a letter, maybe a few $1,000s in cash if I was lucky. I turned the key and pulled the long metal drawer out. It wasn't empty. Inside, there was a thick leather journal, a flash drive, and a single envelope addressed to me. I opened the envelope first. Dad's shaky handwriting covered the page. "My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, it means I am gone and they have treated you exactly as I feared they would. They think I was blind to their greed. They think I didn't hear Julian on the phone planning to sell the company the moment I died. They think I didn't see Patricia moving money into her secret accounts while I was in chemo. I let them believe they won, because the only way to catch a thief, Elena, is to let them think the vault is unlocked." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I picked up the flash drive. "The company Julian just inherited," the letter continued. "It's a shell, a ghost. 6 months ago, I quietly transferred the intellectual property, the patents, and the real assets into a holding trust. The Sterling Industries Julian is stripping apart is nothing but a name with millions of dollars in hidden debt." I gasped. "And the trust?" I read on. "The trust that owns everything, the patents, the real estate, the true value of my life's work, it is not in my name. It is in yours. You are not the poor nursemaid, Elena. You are the owner of everything they think they have, but you must wait. Let Julian sign the sale documents. Let Patricia spend her inheritance. Let them dig their holes so deep they can never climb out." The journal contains the dates, the evidence, and the account numbers of every dollar they stole from me while I was dying. Use it. I stood there in the vault, clutching the letter. I wasn't just Elena, the nursemaid, anymore. I was the CEO of a shadow empire. I was the executioner my father had trained without me even knowing it. I wiped the tears from my face. A cold, hard resolve settled in my chest. Julian wanted to play the big businessman. Patricia wanted to live the high life. Fine, I would let them. I would let them fly as high as they wanted, just so the fall would shatter them completely. I didn't storm back into the mansion. I didn't call Julian to scream at him. I did exactly what my father had taught me. I waited. I hired a private attorney, a man named Mr. Silas, who had a reputation for being a shark in the corporate world. I paid him using the small initial access fund from the trust. When he saw the documents my father had left, he didn't smile. He just whistled low and said, "Your father was a genius, Elena. He didn't just cut them out. He handed them a live grenade and pulled the pin." For the next month, I lived a double life. By day, I was the poor, displaced sister living in a cabin, eating canned soup and chopping my own firewood. By night, I was reviewing the forensic accounting of Sterling Industries with Mr. Silas. I watched the news with a cold kind of fascination. Julian was everywhere. He was on the cover of business magazines titled The New Face of Sterling. He was photographed driving a new Ferrari, partying in Ibiza, and announcing the strategic liquidation of the company's assets. He was selling off the manufacturing division, the logistics arm, and even the employee pension fund to a private equity firm. He thought he was cashing out. He had no idea he was selling things he didn't legally own. Patricia was no better. She started a massive renovation of the estate. She fired the staff who had been with us for 20 years, the cook who made me soup when I was sick, the gardener who taught me how to plant roses. She replaced them with a younger, trendier staff. She threw a gala in her own honor, celebrating her resilience as a widow. I watched the live stream of the party on my phone, sitting in the dark cabin. I saw her wearing Dad's favorite watch, the one he promised to give to his grandson one day. She had resized it to fit her wrist. "Let them spend," Mr. Silas told me over the phone. "The more they spend, the deeper the hole. The trap triggers on the day of the final sale." That day was fast approaching. Julian had arranged to sell the corporate headquarters, the crown jewel of my father's empire, to a foreign conglomerate for $60 million. He needed the cash to cover the debts he had already racked up in gambling and bad investments. I circled the date on my calendar. It was the anniversary of the day Dad was diagnosed. It felt poetic. The morning of the sale, I put on my best suit. It was the one I had worn to my first job interview, the one Dad had bought me. I drove my beat-up sedan to the glass-walled skyscraper that bore our family name. The security guard, old Mr. Henderson, no relation to the lawyer, recognized me. He looked at my car, then at my face. He didn't ask for ID. He just nodded and buzzed me in. I took the elevator to the top floor. The doors opened to the chaos of the boardroom. Lawyers in expensive suits were shouting over phones. Julian sat at the head of the table, looking hungover but triumphant. Patricia was there too, looking at swatches of fabric for her new yacht. The buyers, a group of serious-looking men from Dubai, were sitting with their pens hovering over the contracts. "And here she is," Julian announced, spotting me. The room went quiet. "The prodigal sister returns. What do you want, Elena? Here to beg for a handout before the ink is dry? I'm not here for money, Julian, I said, my voice steady. I walked to the center of the room. I'm here to save these gentlemen from making a very expensive mistake. The lead buyer looked up, frowning. Who is this? My sister. Julian waved his hand dismissively. She's disowned. Ignore her. She's just bitter. I would check the deed to this building before you sign that check, I said to the buyer, ignoring Julian. And I would check the patent registrations for the technology you think you're buying. Julian stood up, his face turning red. Security, get her out of here. You can call security, I said, pulling a single document from my bag and sliding it across the polished table. But you can't sell what you don't own. The buyer picked up the document. He read it once. Then he read it again. His face went pale. He whispered something to his own lawyer, who frantically started typing on his laptop. What is this? Julian snapped, snatching the paper. The Vance Legacy Trust? What the hell is that? It's the entity that owns Sterling Industries, I said, looking him dead in the eye. Dad transferred the ownership 6 months ago. You didn't inherit the company, Julian. You inherited the management title. You're an employee. And the building, the patents, the land, they belong to the trust. And who controls the trust? Patricia asked, her voice trembling for the first time. I do, I said. The silence that followed was heavier than the grave. You're lying, Julian screamed. He threw the paper at me. Dad wouldn't do that. He hated you. You were just the help. He didn't hate me, I said quietly. He trusted me. And he knew exactly what you would do the moment he was gone. You tried to sell the company, Julian. You tried to liquidate the pension fund. That is a violation of the trust's bylaws. I turned to the buyers. The sale is off. The assets are not for sale. And as the sole trustee, I am hereby terminating the employment of the current CEO for gross misconduct and attempted embezzlement. The buyers didn't wait. They packed their briefcases and walked out without a word. Julian was left standing there, shaking, his $60 million payday evaporating into thin air. The ride down the elevator was silent, but the storm broke the moment we hit the lobby. Julian chased after me, grabbing my arm. You can't do this, he shouted, spit flying from his mouth. I have debts, Elena, gambling debts, people who will kill me if I don't pay. You have to sign the release. I don't have to do anything, I said, pulling my arm away. You told me to stand on my own 2 feet. I am. And the house? Patricia caught up, breathless. The estate? The will said I get the house. The will gave you the house, I corrected her. But Dad took out a second mortgage on the estate to fund the trust. A mortgage that hasn't been paid in 3 months because Julian drained the operating accounts. The bank is foreclosing, Mom. You have, about 48 hours to vacate. The color drained from her face. You're evicting your own mother? I'm not evicting you. The bank is. I'm just refusing to use my trust money to bail you out. You have your $2 million from the checking account, right? Oh, wait. I saw the renovation bills. You spent it all on marble floors and gold statues. I guess you'll have to sell those to pay for a motel. I walked out of the building and got into my car. I watched them through the rearview mirror. 2 people standing on the sidewalk, surrounded with wealth, but owning absolutely nothing. But Dad wasn't done. There was still the journal. I drove straight to the district attorney's office. I handed over the leather journal containing the dates and amounts of every dollar Patricia had siphoned off Dad's accounts while he was sick. I handed over the emails Julian had authorized the illegal sale of pension funds. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice. 3 months later, I visited the estate one last time. It was being auctioned off. The new owners were a nice family who wanted to turn it into a school. I walked through the empty halls. The marble floors Patricia had installed were already dusty. The office where Julian had played CEO was stripped bare. I went to the backyard, to the rose garden Dad and I had planted. It was overgrown, but the flowers were still blooming. Patricia was currently out on bail, living in a small apartment downtown, waiting for her trial for tax fraud and embezzlement. Julian had fled the country to avoid his gambling debts, but Interpol picked him up in a hostel in Thailand. He was awaiting extradition. They had called me, of course, dozens of times, begging, screaming, threatening, but I never answered. I had changed my number. I sat on the stone bench and looked at the sunset. I took out the rusted key, the key to box 404, and held it in my hand. It wasn't just a key to a fortune, it was a key to my freedom. I decided not to keep the company. I wasn't a corporate shark like Julian. I sold the assets to a competitor who promised to protect the workers' pensions. I took the money and started a hospice care network, a service that provided dignity and care for the terminally ill, ensuring that no one ever had to die alone or surrounded by greed. As I walked away from the estate, leaving the gate open for the last time, I felt a light breeze on my face. It smelled faintly of peppermint and old cigars. "I heard you, Dad," I whispered to the wind. "I heard everything. I am Elena Sterling. I was the unchosen child, the forgotten nurse, the invisible daughter. But in the end, I was the only one who truly saw. And in a world full of noise and gold, I learned that silence is the loudest sound of all." My phone buzzed. It was a text from my lawyer. "The transfer is complete. You are free." I smiled, got into my car, and drove away. Not back to the cabin, and not to a mansion. I drove towards the horizon, where the road was wide open, and the future was entirely my own. The verdict was in. Julian and Patricia were facing decades in prison. Their empire of lies crumbled around them. But as I walked out of that courtroom, I didn't feel the triumph I expected. The victory was hollow. The years of sacrifice, the pain of being the unchosen child, they had left a wound that even justice couldn't heal. I went back to the cabin, but the silence there felt different now. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a reminder of everything I had lost. I realized then that my father's final lesson wasn't just about revenge. It was about legacy, and mine felt empty. One evening, as I was packing away some of my father's old books, I found something taped to the back of his favorite first edition copy of The Fountainhead. It was a small, worn leather diary, not the journal I had found earlier, but an older one, written in his hand from nearly 20 years ago, the year my biological mother, Clara, died. I opened it, my hands trembling. The first entry read, "Clara is gone. My soul is broken. But what I just overheard, it shatters me completely. Patricia's doctor, Dr. Eleanor Vance, told her that Clara's accidental overdose wasn't accidental at all. Patricia paid her to increase Clara's medication dosage until her heart simply gave out. And Julian my precious golden son, he helped her. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just about money, it was about murder. Patricia and Julian hadn't just stolen my inheritance, they had stolen my mother. My father had suspected it but couldn't prove it. He had spent his entire blind life not just planning their financial downfall, but building a case for their ultimate crime. I continued to read. The diary detailed my father's secret investigation. He had befriended Dr. Vance, pretending to be her loyal patient while subtly extracting information. He had found coded entries in her medical log, hidden audio recordings, and even a confession letter she had written in a moment of guilt, detailing how Patricia had threatened her if she didn't comply. This was the ultimate trap. But the diary ended abruptly, just before my father's own accident. He never got to expose them for this. He had only managed to secure the financial ruin. Now, the weight of this new truth fell entirely on my shoulders. I took the diary and the evidence to Mr. Silas. He listened in stunned silence, his face growing grimmer at each page. Elena, this changes everything. This isn't just a corporate crime. This is a capital offense. But Dr. Vance, she passed away a year after your father's accident, and without her testimony. My father knew that, Silas, I interrupted, pointing to the last page. He left instructions. Look for the safe in the old Vance building, Elena. Dr. Vance kept her real secrets there, the ones she feared would cost her life. The Vance building was an abandoned, dilapidated hospital on the edge of town, a place that had been closed for decades. It was dark, dusty, and filled with ghosts. Mr. Silas hesitated, but the look in my eyes convinced him. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about my mother. We found the old safe hidden behind a broken X-ray machine in Dr. Vance's former office. It was a small, rusty thing. Inside, there was a single, sealed envelope. On it, in Dr. Vance's shaky handwriting, it read, "For Arthur Vance or his daughter, Elena, the truth I could not tell." Inside was a notarized confession signed by Dr. Vance, detailing Patricia's plan to kill my mother and Julian's full knowledge and participation. It also contained a hidden clause in Patricia's original prenuptial agreement that if any criminal act was proven against her, all assets would immediately revert to my father's bloodline. This meant not just the money, but the entire estate, including my mother's heirloom jewelry that Patricia had proudly worn at her bogus gala. This was the final piece of my father's puzzle. He had known all along. He had trusted me, the unchosen child, the shadow, to find it. I didn't wait. The very next day, Mr. Silas filed the new charges. This time, the media frenzy was 10 times worse. Arthur Vance's widow and son charged with murder. The headlines screamed, fueled by the leaked confession and the detailed plan outlined in my father's diary.